without having to give away equity. So welcome to our Startup Week Grasshopper event. It's brought to you by a partnership between the Center for Technology Commercialization and Five Lakes Institute. I'm Kathleen Gallagher. I'm Executive Director of Five Lakes Institute. Pleased you're joining us this morning. I want to introduce our two content people. Brian Walsh is Business Development and Technology Commercialization Consultant with the Center for Technology Commercialization, which works with Wisconsin entrepreneurs, innovators, and technology firms. There is no cost for their services. It's funded by some part of the state government. Brian recently joined CTC as the contact person in the Milwaukee region. But he can connect people with anyone in any region of the state. He was previously a regional and licensing associate at WISIS Technology Foundation, which does all the technology transfer for UW system colleges except Madison and Milwaukee. Brian was also a biotechnology commercialization specialist with the Peace Corps in Guadalajara, Mexico, and owner and CEO of Photodyne, a Heartland firm that supplies molecular biology products to researchers and educators. So he's got that scientific background as well. With Brian is Michael Hendrickson. He's project manager at BrainXell, a Madison company that makes brain and spinal cord cells for researchers. Michael's also founder of NeuroSolace, which is developing drugs for neurological and psychological disorders. He previously held scientific positions at WM Keck. Is that how you say it, Michael? Keck?
Yeah, Keck Lab exists.
Okay, but you were there for it was a lab for biological imaging, and he was at Mithridian in Madison. Steeped in science, he's familiar with these grant programs and has used them. So we're really lucky to have both of them joining us. Let's get started with Brian. Brian, the Center for Technology Commercialization provides free services to Wisconsin companies and entrepreneurs. Tell us what you do for them.
Okay, yep. I'll just give a little more background of the CTC as well. Yes. So we are as you said, a state-funded organization. So we're part of UW system, and we get funding from the Wisconsin Economic Development
Corporation.
WEDC, the C is stuck. And so we are in the same family as the small business development centers. And what we have our team, and we have 5 people. We have 3 in Madison and 2 in Milwaukee. Margaret and I are in the Milwaukee area. But we do, as you said, serve the whole state. And really what we do is provide, for the most part, assistance to early stage businesses with technical ideas. We help them navigate this system of federal funding so they can get money to advance their ideas that have commercial potential. And typically, it tends to be startup early stage companies, as I said, but as you mentioned in the intro, any small business that has an idea for innovation, we'll talk a little bit more about what those thresholds are, but any small business can access these funds if they match up with the requirements. And so that is sort of a area for development in the state, and probably throughout the program, is to get more of those established small businesses to think about this as a way to advance their strategies. And so what I do, and kind of getting to what your question was, what I do is I'm a consultant, and basically we work with clients, anyone that thinks they has an idea. My colleagues and I, we will talk them through the idea to begin with, and we will filter them towards accessing these federal grants if it's a match. We also provide, and all of us do this, including myself, we also provide programming to help them prepare for second rounds of funding, prepare for commercial readiness through using WEDC matching funds for developing business models. We help them with pre-submission reviews of drafts and microgrants to help them get a proposal done. So a variety of things, but it all really starts with talking to people with ideas to see if they're a fit, and then kind of funneling them through the system.
So, and let's be clear, people could do this on their own. There's nothing stopping anyone from doing grants, but you just kind of know the ropes and have a lot of ways you can help them. You have a pretty good track record, the CTC in general, of getting these grants for people, right?
Yep, that's correct. I did a little late night number crunching last night, and so if you look at in the 2018, 2019 in Wisconsin, there were 94 SBIR federal fund. We'll get into what SBIR and STTR is in a minute, but there were 94 awards given to small businesses in the state. And looking at those 94 awards went to 57 companies. And of those 57 companies, 42 were companies that CTC has engaged with pretty actively in recent years. So we do help people and increase their success in getting these awards.
Okay, so we're going to try and mix things up, and hopefully Brian and Michael will have some back and forth without me. But I want to ask Brian one more question just to lay the foundation. Tell us a little bit about the grants and what the criteria are and how you get them.
Sure. Yep. And so these programs, the name of these programs, SBIR and STTR, and SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research Grant, and STTR stands for Small Business Tech Transfer Grant. And I'll refer to them all as SBIR from now on. They're kind of, they get lumped together, and there's some nuances between the two programs, but they're all part of this federal funding that's called America's Seed Fund. And in general, and so there are 11 different agencies that participate, and they're mandated to set aside a percentage of their extramural research budget. So
all federal agencies, right?
All federal agencies, right? So they're required to set for SBIR, they're required to set aside 3.2% of this extramural money, which last year totaled $3.7 billion. And the agencies, I won't name them all, but the agencies are some of your favorites. So basically Health and Human Services, which is, we'll have a lot of focus on that today because National Institutes of Health falls in that category. Department of Defense, USDA, Department of Energy, and et cetera. And so those agencies have funds set aside, and that is overall the SBIR program. What they're looking for is a couple things. One, they're looking for projects that have a high degree of technical risk. So basically, they're unproven. They're things that the feasibility of the idea needs to be proven. So whereas an investor might be looking for something as far along as possible, the SBIR is looking for something that's unproven, that you don't know is going to work for sure. And then the other thing is they're looking for something that has a high potential significant impact. So for significant impact for curing a disease, or significant impact for solving a commerce issue, or something like that. So something that can make an impact if they're going to invest this money. And it should be innovative and novel, and of course overall it's commercial, things that have commercial potential. So it's different than a research grant or contract, that it needs to have commercial potential and solve a problem that is in need of solving from a commercial perspective.
So we'll talk about some examples to clarify that. I do want to say a couple things. Margaret, I don't know if you started videotaping, but if you didn't, that'd be good. Participants, if you have questions, please just put them in the Q&A, and I'm watching that, and I'll jump in with your questions. I'm sure people have specific questions. And I want to make sure, maybe right now, Brian, you want to just give your email address, and we'll do it again at the end, because we should do that a couple times.
Yep, I'll type it in.
Awesome. You'll just put it in the chat.
Yep.
Great. So, examples are where the rubber hits the road, right? So, Michael, let's talk about your experience with these grants. And, let's start out, BrainXell has gotten some of these SBIR grants. How much in these grants has BrainXell received?
They've been a great tool for us to grow our business. So we've gotten more than $1 million in grants. So we've gotten, I think, 4 phase 1 awards and then 2 phase 2 awards. And for a company our size, we're about, I think, 12 people. When we got our first grants, we were much smaller, 3 or 4 people. It's a lot of money. And so it's really helped our, develop our product portfolio and push along the progress of the company much more quickly.
Brian, do you want to just jump in and quickly explain phase 1 and phase 2?
Yep, can do that. So the just hang on, oops, never mind. Yep, I just typed something in the chat box. Yeah, so the way the SBIR funding comes typically is in 2 phases. It's called a 3-phase program. Phases 1 and 2 involve the SBIR, and phase 3 is where you the entrepreneur, you're the company taking it out there and commercializing it yourself. So phase 1 is usually a smaller amount to prove feasibility of your idea, and the projects maybe are 6 months or 8 months, something about in that, roughly in that time frame, and they range from about maybe $150,000 to $250,000 in terms of the award amount. And then the second phase 2 is, okay, so you've kind of proven feasibility in phase 1. Now you have the opportunity to apply for phase 2, and maybe you're advancing the idea. Maybe you're going to do a prototype, or you're going to do something else to get it another step closer. And phase 2 typically is, maybe it's going to be up to a 2-year project, and it's going to be on average $1 million, maybe $1.5 million. So there's sort of this 1-2 punch. There are other exceptions, but that's by far the kind of the typical route.
Let's jump to the chat question, then we'll go back to Michael to talk about his experience with the grant and why they were successful. But this question, I think everyone can see it. Is it a problem to file for a grant application if you just have 1 employee?
No, I mean, you need to.
They're saying that the NSF application asks about the research team, so they're wondering if it's a red flag if you just have 1 employee.
Yeah, you need to have a team or a team in mind when if you are awarded at the time of the project starts. So they will definitely look at the team.
So what I've seen though with CTC is one of the things you guys help do is figure out a team. A lot of the researchers, and you'll put people together, right?
It can happen. It doesn't happen a lot, but it can. We do have a network, and we do know people, and we can make referrals. But typically when we're talking with people, they usually have some team in mind. And I don't know, maybe Mike, when you start talking about your example at BrainXell, you can talk about how the team started when you first started doing proposals.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that right now. I think the no problem to file with 1 person, right, or 50 people. What the reviewers will look at is, I think, whether you can accomplish the project from a technical aspect, and then also whether you can carry that through to commercialization. So if you just have 1 person, that person is unlikely to have all those capabilities. So you could build the team with employees, or you could build it potentially with consultants or an advisory panel. And so I think that it won't be necessarily a red flag, other than the fact that they may view it as the company not having the personnel manpower to get the project done and then to commercialize it, right? Or so even if you build what you want, then what's looking forward down the road to commercializing. What are the prospects? I think it was one advantage we had when we applied is we had a very strong group of 1 or 2, the PI and the technical personnel, and then we had a couple of people with industry experience, commercialization experience, and that helped to round out the team. And I think that made our application, check those boxes for the reviewers that we had the strengths in both aspects. And I think that's really important, because my experience, because I've been on, I've done these, is certainly that you need to have all the pieces in place. If you have really severe deficiencies in one area, that will probably knock you out of funding.
Michael, were all those people employees?
They were, one founder who was not being paid was one of them. Yeah, so they were employees but I guess it was on the grant, you know, it's maybe 3 employees, I suppose. That would a one employee application makes a big difference from 3 employee applications, right? It's triple.
So no,
But we had a scientific advisor who's not an employee. So, you know, putting that team together in whatever way you can is really important. And the more heavily they're involved, the better, right?
Mike, it might be helpful if you just do a few sentences sort of on the roots of BrainXell. You know.
Sure. So we're, you know, kind of a typical spin out from the UW. The technology was developed in our founder's laboratory. In this case, the technology is making cells of the brain and spinal cord from adult stem cells. Then we freeze the cells down and we sell them mostly to pharmaceutical and biotech companies. And that's our whole business. So the technology was patented by Worf, came out of the university. Like I think probably many of the companies that Brian has worked with, the professor doesn't want to leave the university to be a PI on one of these grants, start a company. You know, he may want to start a company. He doesn't want to be, you know, full-time employee of the company. In our case, he had a senior scientist in his lab who was willing to do that, who made a very nice PI for these grants. So he's our chief scientific officer at the company. Then they brought in a couple of people, including myself, who had industry experience and technical experience as well, to kind of round out that team. We were fortunate to have some funding from D2P at the beginning, and then also the founders had put in some seed money, and that helped us get up and rolling.
I just want to jump in on the acronyms. D2P is Discovery to Product, and it's the incubator program at UW-Madison. And PI is?
PI is Principal Investigator. So Brian can, or you know, maybe I can speak this a little bit, and Brian can jump in. And I've talked to a fair number of companies that have asked us, "Hey, you guys did a good, you know, you're doing this. How do we do this?" And one thing that I think people don't think early enough about, in my opinion, is the PI. So that's the principal investigator. That's the scientific lead on the project. And it's also the person who's responsible. So the award is given to the company, but the PI is intimately linked to that. For SBIR grants, the PI has to be 51% employed by the company. And so I think, you know, when I've done these with small companies that I've been part of previously, that's almost the first thing we think about. You know, we have a technology, but then we think about who will be the PI on the grant, because that'll be the person that gets reviewed heavily from a personnel perspective. And you know, there are all sorts of ways to present a person as a PI, but they do have to be employed by the company at the time of the award, and they do have to have a strong background in what you're trying to do.
And yeah,
so that person is key. That's the main person on the team, right, by far.
They have to be able to instill confidence in the reviewers that they're able to make this project happen. And
yes.
So what if you're an industrial company that doesn't have that technical person on staff? How do you deal with that?
So the both types, SBIR and STTR, allow you to contract out some of the work, and there's kind of differences between the two. But if you are, you know, at a company and you need to work with an expert in a certain field because you're trying to, you know, it's maybe a stretch for you to do internally, you can hire out that work, and that's allowed. And for SBIR, and this is kind of getting into the weeds maybe, but it's a percentage, about a third, up to a third. And for STTR, you're actually required to work with an academic institution or a nonprofit research institution.
But then who would the PI be in that case if you were hiring out the technical duties?
So the PI is still generally the PI is the applicant, but yeah, it's so.
Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. The PI must be an employee of the company
for SBIR.
Yes, for an SBIR. Yeah. So Kathleen, I mean, this is a point I want to bring up too, is that, you know, the NIH, at least, which is this, and I think the other agencies have done this to some extent as well, but the NIH, which is one I'm most familiar with, they've changed recently how they evaluate PIs to provide a little bit more leeway for people who are not academics. So, for example, if you have someone in your company who has some patents, well, that person, has demonstrated a contribution to, having us to the scientific discipline or the advancement of innovative products. So, I mean, I think, and it's if that person isn't obvious, it can be some work to figure out who that might be for your grant, which is, it's a problem for some companies. That's certainly the case, to find or identify that person.
But Brian, that's something CTC is experienced in and would certainly engage with, right?
Exactly. That's something that comes up often in conversations.
And then I'll just make another point that the most often that person has a PhD, they do not need to have a PhD.
Okay, so then I'm eligible.
If you have the requisite technical knowledge to accomplish the project.
Oops. Michael, tell us what you think it was about some of these applications you've done that helped you win the grants. Why have you been so successful?
Can I just jump in and add to your question, Kathleen?
Yeah.
So Michael, if you could say why you strategically wanted those grants too, maybe that will help answer that question.
Yeah, so for us, because we were coming out of academia and because the PI was coming out of academia, we had a really strong PI. We had a really strong technical side just baked into how the company happened to form, right? So that allowed us to sort of lower the barrier eventually, to potentially get these grants, right? And I mean, if my opinion is that if you are reasonably competitive for them, you should absolutely have a very close look, because the funding is non-dilutive and it's significant funding. I think, if you were renting space in downtown Cambridge, you're going to burn through the money a lot quicker with salaries, everything else. Here in Wisconsin, the money goes a lot farther. $250,000 with a company or 2 or 3 people, that you can do a lot of work with that. So
when you say non-dilutive, you mean it's a grant. There's no equity. You don't have, no one takes equity and a piece of your company.
You have to perform the project, but there's, especially from the NIH, there's a fair amount of latitude. You can shift how you do that as long as you're aiming towards the goals of the project. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a fantastic source of funding if you're a reasonable fit for it, right?
What was so good about your grants? Why do you think you were so successful at getting the money?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the main thing was that we put all the pieces in place. So you can go through all the review criteria for grants, but you certainly need a strong PI. If they have a good publication record, that's a great bonus. Scientific advisors who are really strong in the field, put that piece in place. We had our own space. So I've been on grants where we said, well, once we get the money, we'll get the space. And then the reviewers say, well, you don't have the space. I say, well, if we had the money, we'd get the space. So having the pieces, not a plan for the pieces, but as much as possible, having those pieces in place to kind of put the reviewer's mind at ease. And then having both the technical side and the commercialization side, like how are you going to commercialize it? Having all those kind of pieces in place, what the CTC can help identify, I'm sure, Brian, right? Like, okay, you guys have a great commercialization team, but this idea is underdeveloped, or vice versa, right? And so then you have to have a compelling, compelling technical solution for a need that exists, right? But I do think the biggest thing was at least to get you in the competitive group was to check all those boxes and make sure you get everything in place.
Go through the boxes again. What
What'd
boxes? Go through the boxes again. Check which boxes.
So the PI would be a big one.
Principal investigator.
Yes. So the scientific team around the PI, which would include advisors and also people performing the work, maybe a research assistant. The commercialization team, or maybe that's just 1 or 2 people, and potentially their advisors as well. The facilities, which is where you're going to do this work. You need usually, if you're going to be usually this work involves physical, not always, but I mean, you could do a software project, but but then you at least need the computers, right? So those are the big things. Obviously, you need to have the company formed and have all the legal requirements in place. But the facilities and the personnel are the big kind of boxes to check. And then once you get through all that, then the reviewers will have more time to kind of dig into the research plan, which is the bulk of what they'll review it over.
And the applicant, sorry for interrupting here, but the applicant decides really, they get to decide what feasibility is, right? So you're picking your project, you decide what will it take to make it feasible. So when you're developing your research plan, you're deciding what are the specific goals or aims of the, 2 or 3 specific aims. And so kind of wrapping things up in a way that's quantifiable and deliverable, and kind of going back to, I think one of the challenges we see that often, especially people coming from academic institutions and then kind of jumping into this world, is that these are grants or contracts for commercialization, and thinking about your, maybe you've done a lot of basic research projects before, but thinking about things in a way that presents the commercial opportunity is a big part of getting these proposals kind of in the sweet spot, basically. So go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, Brian, you may not run into the converse as often, but I'm sure some of our established businesses, if they had it, they would know how to sell it, right? That part they could figure out, and they could do a market analysis. But they may need to strengthen the technical side. And that was one thing we were able to kind of bring those things together just sort of by happenstance. We were able to bring those things together pretty early in our company formation, which was really beneficial, right?
Yeah, playing off that, one of the, right, so what we'll see with an established business is they're used to talking about something and getting it to a point where, or talking about it in a way that they have real confidence it's going to be able to be done, right? And so getting them to think, okay, SBIR isn't looking for an iterative, the next generation of something you already have. It's looking for a stretch. It's looking for something that needs to be proven from a technical side, not from a business side, but from a technical side in terms of the development. And so you're right, Mike, there, that from their perspective, they might have a hard time kind of dialing it back and saying, okay, what's an innovation? What's a true innovation that really could scale beyond our organization? And maybe it's a method, a process, something that goes toward a product, but will take it in a different direction.
But that's something you would work with companies on, kind of deciding whether that fits those criteria or not.
Exactly. That's something we talked through.
And to that point, I think, and also to your point, to your question, Kathleen, that if you look at the requirements for these grants, and I'm speaking mostly to NIH. I know a little bit about NSF, but they will, at least for the NIH, they'll say you don't need any preliminary data. That's not going to fly. You need some preliminary data. So you have this fantastic idea for this highly innovative, creative, product, and you have no data to start out with. That's going to be a really hard sell to them. And so I think that was something we had. We had a fair amount of preliminary data, and so you don't want it to be so out of reach that you have all these grand plans, but there's no data to support the even ability to conduct those experiments. But it also can't be something that's already done, right? So this is anyone that's done any grants knows there's some sort of sweet spot here where you've done enough to show that you're likely to accomplish the project you're proposing, but you haven't done so much that the proposal becomes trivial.
So, Brian, why don't you give us some examples of grants that you've helped companies get from different federal agencies? I think that'll help clarify that.
Sure, yeah, and I'll do a little I'll go back to some of my number crunching to kind of lead into this. Is of the awards that were given in 2018 and 2019 in Wisconsin, the bulk of them went to NIH, to Health and Human Services as a federal agency. And so that was really over 50%. And And we know, we at CTC definitely know that and see that, and it really has to do with how much life science money comes into the state through UW-Madison, Medical College, et cetera. But that by far has been our the biggest agency. And then really there's a tie for second place for the National Science Foundation, NSF, and the Department of Energy. And then it drops down to the Department of Defense, and then way down to USDA, Commerce, and NASA Education. So really a lot of the money coming into the state is going to NIH. But I'll pick a few examples, from different agencies. And we're talking really with Mike here, we're talking about NIH funding. And so I won't spend, talk as much about that since we have that focus already. But so there, for example, there's a company called Safely with the UWM researchers, and they have received awards from both Department of Energy and National Science Foundation. So another point here, a side point here, is you can get multiple awards. I think that's been implied through our discussion so far. You can get awards from different agencies. You can get awards for different aspects of projects. So there are ways of patching together funding, and again, thinking about what it is you're trying to accomplish in your strategy. So Safely, what they do is their award title is High Energy Safe Anodes for Lithium Ion Batteries. So battery technology, basically. And in 2018, 2019, they received over $1.4 million in awards. So that's DOE and NSF, Energy and Science Foundation. Another company that we've worked with called NCD Technologies in the Madison area, and they're a material science company, and they basically have different coatings for different purposes. Their funding has been with the Department of Defense, and so their coating is going toward a particular obscurant for the war fighter. And in 2018, 2019, they're working with about $600,000 in funds. Another company representing the USDA is Amoebagon, and they have a technology for combating potato soft rot. So basically we're talking about crop, improving the health of crops, and their funding is about $750,000 so far. And so all these companies I'm talking about, you can go to the SBIR pages and do a search for companies that have been funded, and there are different filters. And so this is all public information that you can see. Another USDA example that is noteworthy right now is a company called SeedLinked, and they basically have a crowdsourcing platform, so growers and seed companies can see how plants perform regionally. And they've received quite a bit of funding, but they also have recently been, they're now working with Titletown Tech in Green Bay, which has put up some seed money to further develop things and get and commercialize.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. I'd be happy to jump on those because they're sort of ones that I think I could answer about multiple applications. Is that okay?
Yep.
Go for it. So there.
Maybe repeat the question you're answering.
Yeah. So I'll repeat both questions. Some people are doing it in the chat, and some in the Q&A. So it says, is it proper to apply for multiple grant funding to the same research project across different agencies? Do you need to strategically divide the work needed for research to be commercialized, or can you submit roughly the exact same application? And then similar question, when you apply for multiple SBIR grants, how different is each application? And have all of your SBIR grants come from the same federal funding agency? For us, we've applied, we do have one DoD award through, here's another acronym, DoD Love Act. The DoD loves acronyms, from the CDMRP program. But everything else that we've done has come from the NIH. Within the NIH, there are multiple institutes, and so you can select the primary and secondary funding from an institute that matches what you're doing. If you're working on a cancer drug, the National Cancer Institute would be an obvious choice to apply. So it is improper to apply to send the same application to different federal agencies, and they will ask you about that in the application. Has this work been submitted elsewhere? You can do that in series. You could, apply to a place, and if it's not funded, you could send the exact same application back or to somewhere else. That's perfectly acceptable. Our grants have been quite different. We've tried hard to make the technical aspect of the grant substantially different. Now, one thing about these grants is the first one is tough. The first one's a lot of work, especially if you're not familiar with grants. The CTC can help, of course. The second one, you'll have a different research plan, but all the associated other documents you've done before this. So the second one is a lot easier. So a lot of the ancillary material can be very, 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 very similar, but the actual research proposal, our belief is that making them as different as possible is more likely to get you funded. And I've been told by NIH program officers that they don't like it when a company just makes a little tweak and does the next grant and makes a little tweak and resubmits it. That's not popular with the agency. So yeah, you can't submit the same application at this simultaneously, and I would recommend trying to make them as unique as possible.
So Michael, you said submit and then wait. How long does it usually take for an application to get vetted?
That's a good question. Sometimes we propose equipment in our grants, and I'll ask a vendor for a quote, and they'll email me 2 or 3 weeks later and say, "What about the funding?" And I'll say, this is months. So from, I think that it depends on what cycle you're in, but it's going to be 3 to 4 months before you get some feedback on the review. It's probably going to be another 2 to 3 months on top of that before you learn whether you've been funded. And again, another 3 to 4 months on top of that before you would actually be able to draw funds. So we always assume it's going to be a year if you're funded. So that's, that can be tough for some companies for sure. We try to do them and then kind of not forget about them, but move on to the next thing, because it can be. And we had one grant that I think it took 16 months for us to get the funding. It can be a little bit shorter than that. Brian maybe has some figures, but our assumption is a year for the NIH.
Yeah, and that's a good assumption. I think the close to a year is sort of what we tell people is 9 months. Best case scenario is 8 to 12 months, something like that. But it's not weeks. It's not a couple months.
So you really want these to be about a segregated project that isn't critical for your business in the next 6 months.
Yes, that's correct.
Can you give an example of that, Michael? Like how you came up with something for this?
Yeah, so this is stepping without the boots or straps for some companies, and it's a chicken and the egg problem for other companies, and I realize that. So let's say I'll give you a kind of example for us, right? So we're selling 2 or 3 products, and we were able to move our products. You have 2 or 3 projects or products, whatever it is, that are rolling along. They're funded elsewhere, and you have an idea for another one, right? And you don't need it tomorrow, but okay, we have another for a 4th product or whatever it is, or a new product. We've got our other stuff cooking. Let's put in a grant with the idea that in 9 months or a year, if that funding comes on board, we can start to develop that product.
Let's go to, there's another, did you want to say something, Brian?
Yeah. Oh, great.
Or Michael?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that for this reason, for the length, kind of given these lengths of time, I go back to it's best to be thinking strategically, not in the moment, and kind of thinking about the big picture and what kinds of things you want to do in the long term. It's best used in that way, I think.
Does it matter to the grant whether you have existing products or other business going on?
No.
Okay, let's go to the Q&A questions. First one we have there is, and we'll get to all of them, the majority of our team is non-W2 at this point. Are there grants that are available to companies with this structure?
So,
good.
Yeah,
I can answer that, Brian.
Yep, go ahead.
Oh, so the important thing to remember, at least from the NIH, remember that's what I'm most familiar with, is that the PI needs to be 51% employed at the time of the award. So you just have to check a box that I certify that will be true. So you can always, at the time of the award, you can have the PI start as a salaried employee. But you could not continue that structure and receive the funding. Is that correct, Brian?
Yeah, you could, right. At the time, things have to be at the time of the award. You can start the process, but you have to.
When you said you could not continue that structure, you mean you have to have one W-2 employee when the award starts?
The PI must be 51% or more employed when the award starts. That's correct. And also, just as a technical note, that 51% is the person's overall work effort. So you can't work 100% somewhere else and work 50% for your company, according to the NIH. Of course, you can do that. But.
I see a question in here about the difference between NIH SBIR and NSF SBIR, so I can jump in on that one. So, and this is, I'll give you kind of a more general answer to this question as well. So we have these different agencies that are participating in the SBIR program, and they all have their different missions. And NIH, for example, is looking to fund innovative biomedical technologies. DoD is looking to fund things that relate to the warfighter. And the National Science Foundation is actually really pretty broad. It's projects across a variety of technical areas. And so what you will find is, ed tech, it could be biomedical, it could be robotics, software. So what you will find is, and as Mike said, that they've done things with DoD and with NIH, is that there is overlap. And when we first start talking with people, so to work with a CTC, it starts with a counseling call. It starts with pressing a button on our website to schedule a counseling call and establish confidentiality. And then we have a first conversation to learn about.
And I want to say you've got that information in the chat.
I did post, yeah. I'll paste it in when I'm done blabbing right now for a second time. But basically, it starts with a call where we learn about your project and kind of do a little vetting and narrow things down. So you kind of go through and describe your project and say, oh yeah, that's a natural, that's a biomedical technology. So NIH is a natural fit. But you might want to also look at the National Science Foundation, and you might also want to look at the Department of Defense. And maybe those are the three that we want to, you want to concentrate on, or something else, basically based on that conversation. So a key difference then is basically the mission of the agency. What they're looking to do. Other differences are, and there's a lot of nuances from agency to agency, but other big differences are really when the process, when the solicitations are open, so the different agencies have solicitation times throughout the year at different times. And so you need to know that. And the overall process is similar in terms of identifying a solicitation period, identifying topics. So once you identify an agency, you need to look at, drill down a little more specifically. They will, when it's a solicitation period, they'll have specific topics that they're looking for. And so you're kind of getting more and more specific, and we definitely help with that. And so then there are different deadlines, and then the way you approach the program managers, which we always recommend. Sometimes you can send an executive summary to them of the project. Some of them have project pitches, but those are some general differences.
And the funding is different too. I don't know if you mentioned that.
Oh yeah.
Right, yeah.
How so? How is the funding different?
Well, the different agencies can have potentially much different budget requirements. So I mean, if you're doing a phase 1 for a cancer therapeutic from National Cancer Institute, I think you can get as much as $500,000. Whereas I think NSF probably has capped their awards at 200 or 150. But you really want to find the best fit for your project.
Let's move to another Q&A, a question in the Q&A. How novel does the research project need to be? And this is great. We have an example. For instance, I'm working on labeling legislative data based on various elements of public data. the premise of data labeling exists, but modeling legislative data to create a label hierarchy is novel. So, how do you look at something like that where your specific project is novel, but the area you're working in is not?
Yeah, I would say going back to, so if it's been proven and done another way, if you could have done that with another application, then I would say it's not novel enough. If you're doing something to develop the platform or the algorithm or something that that you're just not sure will work, then it's more of a match, if I'm understanding.
So what if it creates a new product or a new use?
Not necessarily if it creates a new product.
Although I would say if it creates a novel product, that's sort of that by definition it's novel.
And there's variations in the agency. So can we step back also and say the threshold for the National Science Foundation tends to be the highest in terms of how novel and technically risky it is. Agencies like Department of Defense and other agencies are they're actually contracting agencies rather than grants. So they're looking for a solution that they can buy or someone in their system can buy. And so if it addresses a specific need or a specific topic within one of those types of agencies, maybe it's more likely. It really depends on maybe more details than I know. So this would be a good example of press the button and give us a call and we can talk further about it.
So, and will you guys help kind of research the agencies to see if that's a need they have?
Yeah, we do that. So we will, in a typical counseling call, we'll go through the process I talked about before, and then we'll try and narrow it down in that call to at least the agencies, and then we'll make recommendations for the entrepreneur, for the business to do some searching, but we'll go back and do some searching on our own and say, here's what we found, here's some recommendations. And so we try to do that as much as we can.
Because I would imagine you might find that, like with this, modeling legislative data with data labeling, you might find there is some application for the Department of Defense that isn't legislative data, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
right.
And that could be a little side project for the company.
Yep, and that's a perfect assessment. That's a really good assessment. One of the things I alluded to before is a really important part of this process of making a decision about submitting a proposal and picking an agency is actually talking to these program managers and running the idea by them before you spend all kinds of time and money going all the way to the proposal submission. And so we're always, once there's been a little research up front, then we get to this point where we say, okay, when the solicitation is open, you have the contact information for program officer, program manager, reach out to them. We have an executive summary template we give people, or NSF has a project pitch format, but reach out to them, fill out that information, say, here's my idea, get a email, get a call going with them and say, here's what I'm thinking, and listen for their feedback. And they might say, oh yeah, this is a fit. We invite you to, submit a proposal, or maybe not, but maybe here's another area or something else. So.
Will CTC work with anyone, or, once they push that button on your website and you do the counseling call, what do you always, if they want to proceed, even if you don't think it's a good idea, will you work with them, or how do you calibrate all that? I know that's a hard question.
Yeah,
I love
that's a good question. Yeah, so so we will, anybody that pushes the button, we will get a call with them first of all to learn about what their project is, and sometimes they're a better match for our an SBDC, a Small Business Development Center, or something like that. So we'll try and look at things that way. Always try to refer them if it's not something that we can help them to. Maybe it's we don't work with like a Main Street business. That would be more of a Small Business Development Center. But if it's somebody who, if it's somebody we talk through them and we say, well, I'm not sure that's really a fit for NSF or NIH, but here's the procedure, here's the executive summary template, here's a, here are the pitch format for NSF or whatever it is. This is where sometimes we have ideas we don't think will go forward, and some, that do, and sometimes
you'll spend more time with the ideas that you're more excited about, that you think have a better shot at getting a grant money.
Yeah, I would say, right. I would put it that way: is we will we'll shepherd as far as we can shepherd, and we'll try to be honest about where we think, okay, this doesn't seem like a real good match for SBIR. You could try talking to a program officer, maybe it fits in this kind of topic. A lot of times when you get down to the topic, when you get down to that granular level, the specific topics, you can see where there might be more opportunities or less opportunities. But we do work with them to try and get to that point where at least to talk to the program manager. If there's any question at all, they're going to be the best.
So this all raises another question, though. I mean, you've talked about the process, and there's certainly work involved in doing these applications. And then you're kind of, in a way, putting something on hold, waiting to see if you get the money for it. Is it worth it? I mean, some companies might say, boy, that's a lot of time, and I might not get the grant. Should I even do it? So what makes it worth it, in both your opinions?
Mike, I'll let you go first from your experience.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of look at what the funding is and see how valuable that is to your company. If you're starting out and you have a very low burn rate, $250,000 is a lot of money, and it might be worth the effort. I mean, you could find that it's easier to get that money than it is to raise the investor money. In some cases, it could be much easier. Now, if you said, oh, well, $1 million won't make that much of a difference to my company, I can raise that from investors pretty easily, then it may not be the work. So I think it's really you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. And also coupled with that is, if you have people coming out of academia who are really good grant writers, these are similar to what they've done before. If you have no one who's ever touched it before, then the amount of work is going to be significant. But for us, it was absolutely worth the work.
Yeah, and I will, I'll add that, we work with a lot of companies that go through phase 1 and they're working on phase 2, and we're helping with them, and then they're working to get to that next step of seeking external capital or strategic partners, and anything that you can do to get them for that use, for getting to phase 3, the commercialization side of things, anything that you can do to de-risk your idea or your product or your technology is going to give you a better chance of getting to the finish line if you're going to market it yourself, or getting some of that external capital that'll help you get to the finish line. So we definitely hear this from the clients that we work with, is you are getting this non-dilutive funding to basically do product development or idea development at the very earliest stages, when generally investors are skittish about doing that kind of thing. So, and you do get to keep the company keeps the intellectual property, so it's that's another advantage. So really thinking about it strategically and using these funds to improve your readiness.
Let me just real quick here. Let me just answer Daniel's question, because I think I could do it quickly. So he asks, the question is, when does the technical team make the jump from their day job to the new company? Which is a great question. I think for these grants, you can do the grants without making that jump. You do have to form the company, but you don't have to be employed, as I mentioned before. So some ways you may be in a good situation if you have solid day jobs and you have enough time to do these applications. And you could potentially then have 1 or 2 members of the team make the jump at the time of the award, which is, if you can get things to work that way when you're just starting out, that can be a really nice way to get the company off the ground. And there are companies that I've seen that have done it like that. I
think it's about time to wrap up here. Do you have any final things you want to say? There was another request for Brian's email, and I did put it in the Q&A, and it's in the chat as well. And Brian put in the chat some links that kind of relate to the process for some information and links that relate to the process of contacting CTC. But do you guys have anything else you want to close with?
Mike, you go first.
Yeah, I would just encourage everybody to look at these grants and don't be overly intimidated by them. Those would be my two pieces of advice. It's more, getting the grant done is more sort of slogging through the bits and pieces rather than, I mean, that's a big part of it, is actually doing the work and putting in the effort. I would encourage everybody to at least have a look and talk to Brian, or, Brian, you can apply my contact information. Maybe Margaret can put that up there, and just reach out to people and explore, because it may turn out your technology is a good fit, in which case it can be a great funding source.
And I will, what I'll say is a good way to scout this out if you've never done it before is to look at things that have been funded. So do a search for, for Wisconsin companies or companies throughout the country in your field, and look at titles and see what kinds of things are funded. I mean, you can see that you can look a variety of ways, but I like looking at examples. So that's one way. And then I'll kind of remind people or let people know there's some upcoming deadlines. So again, these solicitations come at different points of the year. So NIH has a submission deadline. I think it's early January is their next one. Department of Defense has something coming up in February. And National Science Foundation is every quarter. So I think theirs is coming up in December, but it's not as much of a deadline. So keep that in mind. Reach out to us. We can help you kind of funnel towards those things. And then one other thing that I will mention in our last minute is when you do get funding, when you do get this SBIR, STTR funding, CTC also has state matching funds. I mentioned it maybe as a tangent before, to help companies advance their business model, optimize their business model, understand their market. And so there's $75,000, $100,000 matching funds to go through a programming to get yourself to the next step. And for phase 1 companies, we actually help them prepare for the commercialization plan for phase 2. So we have a really high success rate of phase 1 companies getting phase 2 money by going through our SBIR advanced program. And that application is just open now. So check out our website.
Well, it's great to have you guys in the state doing this, and hopefully a lot more companies will take advantage of your services and of this essentially free federal money, right? So thank you so much for